Back in the fall of 2022, I was driving across the country after attending my cousin's wedding in North Carolina. I lived in western Montana, and because airfare had gotten ridiculously expensive, I decided to make the trip by car. Looking back, it wasn't the smartest decision. The drive took nearly 5 days, and by the fourth day, I was running on little more than caffeine, gas station food, and stubborn determination. My plan was simple: drive as long as I could, sleep when I absolutely had to, repeat until I got home. Most of the trip went smoothly. The highways were busy enough that I never felt isolated, and there were plenty of towns where I could stop for food or a cheap motel. That changed late on the fourth night. Around 10:30 p.m., I entered a stretch of highway in eastern Wyoming. The road cut through endless prairie and rolling hills. No towns, no gas stations, no lights. Just darkness. I hadn't seen another vehicle for nearly 20 minutes. My phone displayed a single bar of service before eventually losing signal altogether. Normally, that wouldn't have bothered me, but something about that particular road felt different. The silence seemed heavier. The darkness felt deeper. I turned up the radio to distract myself. It didn't help much. About half an hour later, something appeared in my headlights. At first, I thought it was an animal. Then I realized it was a person. A woman stood on the shoulder of the road. She was waving both arms frantically. I instinctively slowed down. As my headlights illuminated her more clearly, I could see she looked terrible. Her clothing was filthy, one sleeve hung loosely from her shoulder. Her hair was tangled and dirty. Most concerning of all, she seemed unable to stand upright. She leaned forward awkwardly as though injured. I passed her before I had enough time to make a decision. My heart was pounding. A dozen thoughts raced through my head. Maybe she'd been in a crash. Maybe she was lost. Maybe she needed medical attention. But then another thought appeared. What if it was a setup? I had heard stories before. Fake accidents, fake emergencies, people luring drivers out of their vehicles. The problem was that I couldn't simply ignore someone who might genuinely need help. I drove another quarter mile before finally pulling over. I sat there, staring into the darkness ahead. The guilt kept growing. Eventually, I made up my mind. I'd go back. But I wouldn't leave the car. I'd ask if she needed emergency services and leave if anything felt wrong. Simple. I made a U-turn and headed back. When I reached the area where I'd first seen her, she wasn't standing near the road anymore. Instead, I spotted her farther back near the tree line. She was still waving, still calling for help. At least I thought she was. The sound barely reached me through my closed windows. I slowed down and pulled onto the shoulder. Then I stopped. Something felt wrong immediately. She wasn't moving toward the road. If someone genuinely wanted help, wouldn't they come closer? Instead, she remained near the trees, almost as if she wanted me to come to her. I rolled down the passenger window. "Are you okay?" I shouted. No answer, just more waving. I tried again. Still nothing. The wind carried a faint voice toward me. I couldn't make out the words. Against my better judgment, I got out. The night air felt cold, unnaturally cold. I stepped onto the gravel shoulder and looked toward the woman. She seemed farther away now. That didn't make sense. I could have sworn she'd been much closer when I stopped. I took several cautious steps forward. "Ma'am?" No response. The woman turned slightly and waved again. Her movements looked strange, almost mechanical, like someone pretending to act injured. I paused. The trees ahead were dense enough that my headlights barely penetrated them. Beyond a few yards, everything disappeared into darkness. The woman stood just inside that darkness, waiting. The uneasy feeling in my stomach intensified. I should have left, I know that now. But at the time, concern outweighed fear. I walked farther from the road. My car was now 20 feet behind me, then 30, then 40. The woman remained still, watching me. Suddenly, she called for help again. The voice sounded weak and broken, like someone who had been screaming for hours. I took another step, then another, and that's when something finally clicked. Every time I moved closer, she seemed to move farther away. Not by much, just enough to keep distance between us. The realization stopped me cold. I wasn't helping someone. I was being led somewhere. My eyes darted around the dark woods. For the first time, I noticed how completely silent everything was. No insects, no birds, no wind, nothing. Then the woman stopped moving entirely. The weak cries vanished instantly. Not faded, stopped. Like somebody had flipped a switch. A chill ran down my spine. She slowly straightened her posture, and standing fully upright, she looked much taller than I originally thought. At least 6 feet, maybe more. I stared into the darkness. She stared back. Then very slowly, she tilted her head, and for the first time, part of her face emerged from the shadows. The moment I saw it, every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. For a second, neither of us moved. The figure stood between the trees, frozen in place. The weak voice calling for help had completely stopped. Every instinct in my body screamed that something was wrong. I slowly backed away. The person took another step forward. Moonlight slipped through the branches overhead, revealing more of their face. My stomach dropped. The features looked wrong. Not monstrous, not supernatural, just wrong. The jaw was unusually broad. The shoulders seemed too wide. The body looked like someone attempting to disguise themselves as a woman from a distance. Suddenly, I understood why I had felt uneasy from the moment I saw them. The injured woman I thought I had seen beside the road wasn't a stranded traveler. It was bait. The figure tilted its head and stared directly at me. Then that weak voice returned. "Please?" The tone sounded forced, artificial, like someone trying to imitate distress. I didn't wait to hear another word. I turned and sprinted toward the road. Branches slapped against my arms as I ran through the darkness. Behind me, I heard movement, fast movement, far faster than before, the sound of footsteps crashing through leaves. Whoever it was had started following me. Adrenaline exploded through my body. I burst from the tree line and nearly stumbled onto the asphalt. My car sat exactly where I had left it, headlights still illuminating the empty road. I yanked open the driver's door and threw myself inside. The moment I slammed the door shut, I looked toward the woods. For a split second, I saw the figure emerge from the darkness. They stopped at the edge of the trees, watching, not moving, just standing there. I jammed the car into drive and accelerated away. My tires squealed against the pavement. In the rearview mirror, I kept expecting to see them chasing after me, but the road behind remained empty. For the next hour, I drove without slowing down. The isolation that had seemed peaceful earlier now felt terrifying. There were no gas stations, no restaurants, no houses, nothing. Just endless darkness stretching across miles of empty highway. Every few minutes, I checked my mirrors. Every distant shadow made my pulse spike. Eventually, I reached a small town where my phone finally regained service. I pulled into a brightly lit truck stop. The moment I parked, I realized my hands were shaking. I sat there for several minutes trying to calm myself. Part of me wanted to dismiss everything. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe it was really an injured person. Maybe fear had distorted what I saw. But the more I replayed the encounter, the less believable that explanation became. If they needed help, why keep moving deeper into the woods? Why disappear when I first returned? Why stop speaking the instant I stopped approaching? And why chase after me? None of it made sense. I went inside the truck stop and bought coffee. While standing in line, I mentioned the encounter to an older employee behind the counter. I expected him to laugh, Instead, his expression changed. "Where exactly was this?" he asked. I described the stretch of highway. The man immediately nodded. That reaction made my stomach tighten. He told me several travelers had reported strange encounters along that road over the years. Nothing proven, nothing officially documented, just stories. People claiming someone would stand near the highway pretending to need help. Sometimes it was a woman, sometimes it was a child, sometimes it was an elderly person. The descriptions always changed, but the setup remained the same. A lone traveler, an isolated road, a desperate person needing assistance. Most people ignored them and kept driving. Others stopped. The employee didn't know what happened after that. Nobody ever had a clear answer. The stories were just rumors. Still, hearing that sent a chill through me. I stayed at a motel in town that night. Even inside a locked room, sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure standing motionless between the trees, watching, waiting. The next morning, I continued my trip west. I deliberately chose a different route. It added several hours to the drive, but I didn't care. I never wanted to see that road again. Years have passed since then. I've told the story to friends and family countless times. Most think it was probably an attempted robbery. Some believe it was a prank. Others think I simply encountered someone mentally unstable. Honestly, I hope that's all it was, because the alternative bothers me far more. Whoever that person was, they seemed to understand exactly how to manipulate basic human compassion. They knew most decent people wouldn't abandon someone who appeared injured and alone. They counted on that instinct, and for a few minutes, it worked on me. Sometimes I still wonder what would have happened if I had continued walking toward them, if I had followed them deeper into the forest, if I had ignored that growing feeling in my chest telling me to stop. Maybe nothing would have happened. Maybe it would have been harmless. But every time I remember those footsteps suddenly racing after me through the darkness, I reach the same conclusion. I don't think they wanted help. I think they wanted me. And out there in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest town, with no cell service and no one else on the road, I came far closer to finding out why than I ever should have. Back in the fall of 2021, I took a solo hunting trip into a remote wilderness area near Black Ridge National Forest in western Montana. I had been hunting and camping for years, so spending days alone in the woods wasn't unusual for me. In fact, I preferred it. The solitude was part of the experience. No traffic, no phones ringing, no people. Just miles of forest and silence. The shelter I planned to use wasn't exactly a cabin. It was one of those old public backcountry shelters maintained by the Forestry Service decades ago, and mostly forgotten since. The structure sat nearly 7 miles from the nearest trailhead, deep in the mountains. It consisted of 4 wooden walls, a roof, a single window, and 2 sets of bunk beds. No electricity, no running water, no lock on the door. Just enough protection from weather. I arrived shortly before sunset and spent the night there before beginning my first hunting excursion the next morning. The forest immediately felt different. Quiet. Far quieter than it should have been. Usually, when you're deep in the wilderness, there are sounds everywhere. Birds, squirrels, wind, the occasional deer moving through brush. But during my first 2 days out there, I saw almost nothing. No deer, no elk, no tracks, no fresh signs of wildlife. It felt as though the entire forest had emptied itself. I tried not to think about it. Sometimes nature is just strange. After 2 nights camping farther into the mountains, I packed up and headed back toward the shelter. The hike back took most of the morning. By noon, I finally reached the structure. Everything appeared normal at first. The door was shut, the window was intact, nothing seemed disturbed. I tossed my backpack onto one of the lower bunks and started unpacking supplies. That was when I noticed something. My cooking pot wasn't where I had left it. Neither was my lantern. Both items had been moved several feet across the room. Not stolen, just moved. I stood there looking around. At first, I thought maybe I had forgotten where I placed them. After all, I'd been hiking for 2 days. I was tired. But as I continued checking the room, more things seemed off. A blanket had been folded differently. My water container had changed positions. A chair near the wall was facing another direction. Small things, nothing major, yet enough to convince me someone had entered while I was gone. That realization didn't alarm me. The shelter was public. Anyone could use it. Some other hunter or hiker had probably stopped by. Maybe they stayed the night. Maybe they were simply curious. Either way, it wasn't a huge deal. I made lunch and spent the afternoon resting. The weather outside grew colder as evening approached. Clouds rolled across the mountains, turning the sky gray. By sunset, temperatures had dropped significantly. I sat inside the shelter eating canned stew and preparing equipment for another hunting trip planned for the next morning. Eventually, darkness settled over the forest, and with it came that same strange silence. The woods outside felt dead. No owls, no coyotes, no insects, nothing. Just stillness. I climbed into my bunk around 9 p.m. Sleep didn't come easily. The shelter felt unusually isolated. Maybe it was because I knew someone else had been there. Maybe it was because of the eerie quiet outside. Whatever the reason, I remained awake for quite a while. Then, sometime around midnight, I heard voices. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but the voices continued. 2 men, talking quietly somewhere outside. I sat upright immediately. The conversation sounded distant at first, then gradually grew louder. The men were approaching. Footsteps crunched across leaves. A flashlight beam briefly passed across the window. I listened carefully. There was nothing threatening about what I heard, just 2 people walking toward the shelter. Still, something felt off. Maybe it was the late hour. Maybe it was because of nobody should have been hiking these trails at midnight. The footsteps stopped outside. The door opened. 2 men stepped inside. Both appeared to be in their late 30s or early 40s. Heavy jackets, backpacks, hiking gear. Normal enough. Yet the moment they entered, I felt uncomfortable. Neither seemed surprised to see me, not even slightly. Most people would react somehow. A quick apology, a startled expression, at least a greeting. These men showed none of that. One simply glanced at me and nodded. The other didn't acknowledge me at all. "Evening," I said. Neither responded. They walked to the opposite bunk beds and began setting down their gear. The room was tiny. With 3 grown men inside, it felt cramped. I tried again. "Long hike?" Nothing. No answer, not even eye contact. The men climbed onto their bunks. One took the top. The other took the bottom. Then both became completely silent. The situation grew increasingly uncomfortable. I lay back down and stared at the ceiling. Maybe they were exhausted. Maybe they weren't talkative. People are different. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The shelter remained silent. No movement, no conversation, no shifting around. Nothing. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I turned my head slightly toward the other bunks. The man on the lower bunk was staring directly at me. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, as though he'd been watching me the entire time. A chill ran through my body. I immediately looked away. My pulse quickened. Maybe he was just awake. Maybe I startled him too. That explanation sounded reasonable, but deep down I didn't believe it. Something about his expression bothered me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't confusion. It was more like observation, like he was studying me. I spent the next hour lying motionless, trying to convince myself everything was fine, trying to ignore the overwhelming urge to leave. The forest outside was dark and dangerous. Getting lost out there at night was a real possibility. Staying inside the shelter seemed like the safer choice. Eventually, fatigue won. My eyes grew heavier. The silence remained unchanged, and somewhere after 1 a.m., despite every instinct telling me otherwise, I finally drifted off to sleep. What woke me up wasn't a sound, it was a feeling, the unmistakable sensation that someone was watching me. I opened my eyes. The shelter was completely dark. For several seconds, I couldn't see anything. Then slowly, shapes began emerging from the darkness. I looked toward the opposite side of the room and instantly froze. The bunks were empty. The bunks were empty. For a second, I thought maybe I was still dreaming. I blinked several times and looked again. The blankets were gone from both bunks. The two men were nowhere to be seen. A cold wave of panic washed over me. The shelter was completely silent. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. I slowly pushed myself upright. The darkness inside the small building felt suffocating. Moonlight leaked through the single window, creating faint gray outlines across the floor. That's when I noticed them. The two men were standing in the middle of the shelter, motionless, just a few feet from my bunk. Both were facing directly toward me. For a moment, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. Neither man moved, neither spoke. They simply stood there, staring. I felt every hair on my body stand up. My heart hammered so hard it hurt. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted. No response. The men remained completely still. The silence was somehow worse than if they had threatened me. I reached for the flashlight beside my sleeping bag and switched it on. The beam illuminated their faces. Both immediately turned their heads slightly away from the light, but they still didn't speak. That was enough for me. I didn't wait to find out what they wanted. I jumped from the bunk, grabbed my backpack and rifle, and rushed toward the door. As I passed them, neither man attempted to stop me, neither even flinched. They simply watched. That terrified me more than anything else. I burst through the shelter door and ran into the darkness. The cold night air hit my face. Adrenaline pushed me forward. I sprinted down the trail as fast as I could. Branches scraped against my arms. Loose rocks shifted beneath my boots. Several times I nearly fell, but I didn't stop. The image of those two men standing silently beside my bed kept replaying in my head. I had no idea how long they'd been watching me. 5 minutes? 10? An hour? The thought made me feel sick. After nearly 4 miles of non-stop hiking, fatigue finally forced me to slow down. I found a cluster of trees overlooking a steep ravine and settled there for the remainder of the night. I didn't bother pitching my tent. I didn't build a fire. I didn't sleep. I sat with my rifle across my lap and watched the darkness until sunrise. Every snapping twig made me tense. Every shadow looked suspicious. Fortunately, no one appeared. As soon as daylight arrived, I packed up and started hiking back toward the trailhead. The entire journey out felt longer than usual. I constantly looked over my shoulder. Part of me feared I'd see those two men following behind, but the forest remained empty. When I finally reached my truck late that afternoon, I felt relief unlike anything I'd experienced before. I drove straight into the nearest town. After getting a hotel room, I contacted local authorities and reported the incident. Unfortunately, there wasn't much they could do. The shelter was public property. The men hadn't directly threatened me, and by the time anyone could investigate, they would likely be long gone. The officer I spoke with agreed the situation sounded disturbing, but there wasn't enough evidence to pursue anything further. Years have passed since that trip. I've spent plenty of nights in remote forests since then. Most have been completely uneventful, but I never returned to Black Ridge, and I never stayed in a public shelter again. Maybe those men were simply strange. Maybe they were playing some kind of sick prank. Maybe they intended to rob me and change their minds. I'll never know. What I do know is this: people don't normally stand over a sleeping stranger in the middle of the night without saying a word. They don't spend hours silently watching someone, and they certainly don't react with complete indifference when discovered. Whatever those men were planning, I interrupted it by waking up. Sometimes I think about what might have happened if I'd slept another 30 minutes or another hour. Would they have eventually left? Would they have stolen my gear? Or was something far worse about to happen? I don't have those answers, and honestly, I'm grateful I never found out, because some mysteries are better left in the middle of nowhere.